All right. So my project focused on pathology using analysis. So pathology, particularly as a starting point for psychology, so for cancer diagnosis largely. So I began from a basis of the technology called AutoPap, which was developed in the mid 90s as a screening mechanism, visually screening mechanism, pap smears, which are used to diagnose cervical cancer. So as a starting place, what AutoPap and the company that developed it, NeoPath, did was to develop a new imaging system. So something which would consistently create a mode of capturing static images that were consistent, that were capturing a high enough quantity such that averages could be determined. Especially because, as a variety of interviews with people actually working in developing this demonstrated, the biggest problem was that in determining the presence of cancer cells, you had this problem of a needle in a haystack. So you were attempting to find these minuscule cells that exist in 1 to 100,000 ordinary cells in many situations. Not to mention the fact that besides cancer cells, you also recruit cancerous cells. So, uh, sorry, HISL cells, so high risk intraepithelial squamous cells. I don't know exactly what the acronym is, but you look for these that have characteristics that indicate the idea that cancer will develop. So, aside from these low and high risk cells, you also have similar cells that have certain characteristics but undetermined possibility of developing cancer. Which meant that beyond that, you had this problem of actually classifying these cells, which in part is why in my research I eventually made the claim that this is why this remains a rescreening mechanism. However, progressing from there, I looked at technologies that developed from this. So actually, in their patents, uh, cite AutoPap as a basis for developing technology, which involved, to begin with, a really interesting technology for detection of lung nodules, which applied this to radiological 3D images, and then used that to develop the sphericity tests and so on beyond the morphological testing facilitated by AutoPap, which was largely centered on simply irregular shape and irregular nucleus shape and presence and so on, as well as a variety of things regarding that weren't as easy to classify based on simple characteristics, but instead had other algorithmic um, characteristics that could be detected through these images. So, aside going back to AutoPath for a minute, aside from the actual imaging, the thing that really interested me was how you actually create these systems which could classify cells in these various categories. So, while, for example, this later technology for lung nodules utilized neural networks, which really facilitate large-scale artificial intelligence store code and are a consideration of a wide variety of factors. RMAP depended on decision trees, which many people claim was in some ways its folly. Not to say it doesn't still exist, but of course one of the big changes that happened. So I did consider this evolutionary progression for the actual systems used to classify it as well. Back from psychology. Beyond that, I looked at more recent development in technology like psychometry, which does diverge a bit from this in the idea that it depends on a very specific physical system detection, which is a fluid system through which cells are pushed and analyzed beyond simply their morphological characteristics through various modes of testing and a wide variety of things. So I especially consider case study of this. So essentially, my conclusion is that this is an ideal technology to use as a basis for all kinds of future pathological developments, and especially because this is what I intend to look towards more this trimester, is possibility for low cost communication and so on. So I look forward to getting back to you in 3 months.